I'm really happy to welcome my friend Larry Watson on the podcast today. Larry is a longtime novelist who has written a lot of fabulous books. Let Him Go was made into a film with Kevin Costner and Diane Lane, probably about 3 years ago?
Longer ago than that, but
Yeah, okay.
the movie was released right during COVID.
Oh,
So,
yeah, right.
yeah, bad
Yeah,
timing.
we'll get to that in a bit here, but the first thing I actually wanted to ask you was whether you remember the first time we met.
Oh gosh. Were we on a panel together?
Well, you were okay. So it was in Missoula, and it's kind of a funny story, actually. I was on a panel, and somebody asked me about the publishing, the whole maze of trying to get published, and I told a story about having someone at Milkweed agree to read one of my novels, and they read it, and they wrote me a very nice note back saying, the writing's great, blah blah blah. But we already have Larry Watson in our. So you came up to me afterward and said, "Hi, I'm Larry Watson." So yeah, that was pretty hilarious.
So I'd already used up the Montana quotient or something like that.
That's right.
Yeah,
Yes. Yeah,
but
I
believe me,
was.
they don't have room for any more right now.
Yeah. Well, you grew up in North Dakota, but a lot of your books are set in Montana. I'm just curious about how you have made that choice so many different times.
You know, but many people outside the region don't know that eastern Montana and western North Dakota are very similar in terms of landscape and geography, and I've said population, which means there isn't any. When I was growing up in North Dakota, the North Dakota-Montana border was really pretty porous for our family. We had a lot of friends and family in there. Some North Dakotans moved to Montana, some Montanans moved to North Dakota. And so there was a lot of back and forth. But when I had a notion for this novel, and in a way I was sort of thinking of it not as part of a state, but a different kind of region, Northern Plains. And but I wanted that Western frontier association that Montana will lend, but North Dakota doesn't, even though it might very well be as deserving
Yeah.
of those as Montana. But I wanted that because I thought it was going to supply some tension for what was going on in the novel.
Mm. Yeah, that makes sense. So Montana 1948 was actually probably your first kind of big breakthrough novel, wasn't it?
It was my second published novel, 13 years after my first novel. But yeah, it was the first book that went beyond anything that I might have expected or fantasized about having a novel published. It had been 13 years since my first novel, and during those 13 years, I was writing other novels, but I couldn't interest an editor or a publisher, and so when Milkweed accepted that, and their notion of a first printing was going to be 7,500 copies, and they sort of had to swallow hard for that because that was a larger printing than they'd done. So any of the things that happened after that, they were I mean that was gravy.
Yeah. So was there ever any talk about a film for that one?
Oh, right from the start. And in fact, the talk is still happening. Early on, a producer from Paramount optioned it. It was one of those classic moments. I got a phone call, and so somebody said, "Mr. Picker from Paramount is on the line,"
Oh, geez. Yeah.
and and he commissioned a screenplay. And somehow it found its way back to me. And it was a screenplay written by somebody who had no knowledge of the
Mm.
region. It had natives living in caves and playing mahjong and
Oh
uh,
my
uh,
God.
yeah, but nothing happened to it. And then it was optioned by a fellow who wanted to write, produce, and direct it. He came close, and we talked a lot, but finally he couldn't do it. And now, and by the way, I never owned the rights to it, so I didn't have anything to say about where
Mm.
it went. A production company called Echo Lake owns the rights now. They've tried many times. They've also hired a few people to write screenplays, but the head of the company just says they haven't been able to get it done. But he said, we're not giving up on it. He said, might have to be Montana 2048, but we'll stay with it.
What was it like having the Let Him Go
Oh,
produced? And
completely different, completely
yeah,
different. Tom Bazooka, who wrote the screenplay and directed the film, called me and said, does anyone have the rights or the option on it? And I said, no. And he said, he'd like to give it a try. And we had a number of conversations, and we just got along real well. And I could tell that he had a vision for the book and wasn't far off from what my thoughts were about the story and the characters. And in relatively short order, they had a production company, they had a cast, although it was Kevin Costner finally signing on that made it happen.
Don't start what you can't finish.
I was surprised how true it was to the book. It's kind of rare to see that happen these days. And I'm not a big Kevin Costner fan, but I actually thought he did a good job with that role.
You're going with me or without me.
I agree.
Yeah. Your writing reminds me a lot of another Larry from North Dakota, Larry Woiwode.
Yeah.
And especially his book Beyond the Bedroom Door, which one of my professors in graduate school recommended that book to me, and I was just blown away by that novel. So did you know him, and was he an influence on you?
He was, well, thank you very much for that. I mean, I just hold him in the highest regard. So just having my name mentioned in the same sentence is an honor. So I appreciate that. I love that book too. It wasn't an influence on me, at least not consciously, as in I saw things in there that I wanted to try to do. But we were living in Salt Lake City. I was in a graduate program at the University of Utah. And 2 weeks in a row, the New Yorker published stories that were set in North Dakota. And one of them was by Larry Woiwode, and the other was by Garrison Keillor. And the Larry Woiwode story was something that eventually found its way into Beyond the Bedroom Wall. And it might have been that said something to me that maybe it's okay to write about that part of the country, and gave my confidence a little boost or something. I did meet with Larry Woiwode a few times over the years and talked to him and read other work of his that I liked, but nothing made the impression on me that Beyond the Bedroom Wall did.
Yeah, that was a special book. And I don't think a lot of people realize what a rich literary history North Dakota has. Besides him, there's William Gass, who's kind of revered among writers, even though he never really had much of a following. He was just an incredible craftsman. Did you ever know him? Or
I didn't. A couple other writers, Tom McGrath as a poet, Rowland Flint as a poet, and of course, at the top of the ladder for most of us is Louise Erdrich. Yeah, I love her fiction.
She's actually my favorite contemporary novelist. Yeah, she's amazing.
Yeah.
So talk about what growing up in North Dakota really actually meant to you then. How did it shape you?
How did it shape me? Well, in every way imaginable, I suppose you could say, and many of those ways that I didn't realize. One of the ways that growing up in North Dakota shaped me is, I don't know quite how to say this. It made me grateful and for certain things that came along later in my life. Before my wife and I went to Paris for the first time, I called an old friend of mine. He and I had grown up in North Dakota together, and he'd been in France a number of times. His wife was a French teacher, so he sort of knew the country. I just asked him for some travel hints, and he said, "No, you're from North Dakota. You're going to love it." and I sort of instinctively understood what he meant because when we got there, I mean, there were things that were so beautiful for no other reason than to be beautiful.
Mm.
And not to put the knock on North Dakota, it's a wonderful place, but they don't do that there. And um, and growing up in North Dakota, I had a full, rich childhood and adolescence, but art museums weren't a part of it, and they are now. My wife and I were just in Chicago and visited the Art Institute a few weeks ago, and I think I have a greater appreciation for that because I grew up in North Dakota. I didn't have access to those kinds of things, and I understand something about what it can mean. In many ways, my growing up was sort of like a suburban middle class American upbringing. I mean, even though it's a very rural state, um, when I read the fiction of John Cheever or John Updike, for example, it seemed familiar to me. When I was a kid, I was a big fan of Western movies, comic books, TV shows. They were hugely popular, and I was a fan. I was a consumer. But then when we visited Montana, we weren't going to ranches. We didn't
Yeah.
have any of those kinds of experiences. My uncle in Great Falls was a banker, and my aunt in Bozeman was a nurse, and my parents worked in the oil business. So in Billings, we stopped at the home of the owner of the company, a beautiful home in Billings. So those weren't Wild West kinds of experiences. Those weren't Western experiences.
Yeah.
So I guess I sort of knew or understood something even before I understood it, which was this separation between myth and reality.
Mm.
And the Western myth as it was presented in all of those Western movies, many of which I loved and still do, and what the reality was, because they never did the story of the Great Falls banker in any of the movies. When I was teaching, I always put a quote on the board at the beginning of every class, and one of the quotes I used was from Jim Thompson, and he said, "There's only one plot. Things are not what they seem." And
I love it.
and visiting Montana sort of gave me that sense of things not being quite what they seem.
Mm.
And I'd add to that two things from my own family. In those Western movies, the main characters were often cowboys. They were sheriffs. And one of my grandfathers was a cowboy. One of them was a sheriff. And he'd been a cowboy in Montana.
Oh,
But
wow.
he was an immigrant from Sweden. He didn't come up north on a cattle drive.
Right.
And if you would have said to my grandfather, you're sort of an iconic American figure, a cowboy, he wouldn't have understood that. He would have thought that laughable.
Right.
His big accomplishment in life was homesteading, starting a farm, having a family, helping to start a community. When my father and grandfather were sheriffs, I mean, my father never carried a gun when he was a sheriff. So it was those occupations, those people weren't what I was seeing in the movies or on television programs. So I was kind of aware of that split and that, yeah.
Right. So one of the things I've loved about all the books that I've read of yours is that you are really good at capturing the dynamics of families with very few, like it's always very understated, but so powerful. And that was the thing I loved most about Let Him Go. So much of what happens between families in our part of the country is just so understated and unspoken, and you just capture that so well. The tension is just always there. So I mentioned, you've been married to your high school sweetheart for decades, right? I just wonder if that you feel like that's
58
part
years.
58 years. That's amazing.
Yeah.
So I just wonder if that having a long-term relationship like that has really benefited as far as being able to capture these family dynamics.
Well, it can't hurt. I mean, I've always lived with a domestic arrangement.
Yeah.
With my parents, with my sisters, and then my wife and I and our children. So, if nothing else, it's allowed me to feel some confidence in presenting other domestic arrangements. It's sort of like, oh yeah, I know how things work there. I know how things, and of course, many of our friends have been other married couples for a while there. It felt as if we were some sort of carrier or something. It seemed like our friends were getting divorced left and right, and sort of spooked us after a while. Do we dare make friends?
Yeah.
So I felt as though I could write about family life and do it in a believable way. And as I was saying before about Montana settings and other settings in other Midwestern states, I'm sort of a writer of the great indoors. Most of the drama in my novels take place in kitchens and living rooms and bedrooms and in cars, and that's often where married life, domestic life, family life plays itself out.
Yeah. And of course, another thing that you do really well is capture the conflict. I mean, nothing's ever smooth. And in this case, the thing I loved about this story is how, so George and Margaret have lost their son, and their daughter-in-law has married this guy who's pretty troubling character. So Margaret has decided that she's going to go retrieve their grandson because she's just afraid of what's going to happen to that little kid.
I saw exactly what I've always felt about Donnie Weeboy. And I saw that girl can't protect her child.
Margaret, Jimmy's her boy.
He's your grandson.
It's a road trip story. It's a conflict within the couple. It's clear that George is really not as interested in this endeavor as Margaret is. So how did you come up with this concept for the story?
Well, I remember a very small incident that happened long before I began the novel. Our daughter and her husband and our grandson came over to visit us, and they were about to move. They lived in a small town in Wisconsin, about 35 miles from us, and they were about to move to another community. It was only 60 miles away. But I remember we were walking out to their car. It was a Sunday evening. It was after dark, and saying goodbye. And I thought, well, what must it be like for those grandparents who are saying goodbye to their grandchild, and they're not going 60 miles away. I mean, they can be going 600 miles away, and you don't know when you're going to see them again. And so I felt something in that moment that I think I was able to call on when I was writing Let Him Go. And then also I was interested in the relationship between George and Margaret and their differing notions of what's right. Margaret is absolutely convinced that she's doing the right thing when she sets out to bring her grandson back to them. George is not sure. In fact, he thinks it's wrong. You can't do that. You can't take a child away from its natural mother. And he has been a law enforcement officer. He sort of has that legalistic mind. But there it is. I mean, who's going to win? Well, it's pretty obvious. It's going to be Margaret. She's going to go. And because George loves her more than he thinks about certain matters of legality or morality, he'll follow her wherever she goes. he'll go.
Yeah, with tragic consequences in this case.
Yeah, yeah.
So, another thing that was interesting to me about this is that you've got that kind of loyalty from George toward his wife, and her loyalty to the grandson, and then you've got this other family, the Wee Boys, who have essentially kidnapped this kid in a way. So their loyalty is just as strong, or maybe even stronger in its own twisted way, but it's so completely different. So I was just curious how you came up with that. I mean, this is such a great source of conflict and tension throughout the book and the movie.
In families, there's often a grandparent competition.
Right,
Who's the best set of grandparents?
right.
Who's the more fun grandpa? Who's more loving grandma? So I that probably figured into it. But I did think about, I think it's something that you might have mentioned in your notes, that Margaret Blackledge and Blanche Weeboy were quite similar in some ways. They both felt very strongly that the child belonged with them. In an early conversation that I had with the fellow who wrote the screenplay, he said he saw them as different sides of the same coin.
Mm-hmm.
And I liked that. I liked that a lot. When Let 'Em Go was published in an Italian translation, their title for it was Uno di Noi, One of Us. And I thought, just a wonderful title. I mean, that struggle plays out in the world in so many ways. I mean, in families, between families, from state to state, from region to region, from country to country. He's not really one of us. Well, he doesn't. She doesn't seem like one of us. No, don't go over there into that place. They're not like us. And so I thought I was writing about that, but I admired the way they made that explicit. There are so many books, I think, that could work with that title. One of us.
Right. So another similarity between this book and Montana 1948 is the presence of the law enforcement in the family. And you mentioned your dad and your grandfather were both sheriffs. So must have been fun to be able to incorporate that, what you remember. Did you use much autobiographical information?
Not a lot. And in fact, both my grandfather and my father were sheriffs before I was born. So I don't have personal memories of them in office. But again, if it was sort of what I was talking about before about writing about families. I knew who my grandfather was. I knew who my father was. So I felt as though I knew somebody who could be a sheriff, and so I felt that, I don't know, comfort, confidence. I can't believe I'm saying that. I'm the least confident writer in the world. But you do try to find something that you know and can write from plausibly. And also, my father did not have a brother. He had brothers. There were 4 Watson boys, and he was the good son. He was the one who wasn't in trouble. And so when I was growing up, I felt the tension in him, and then that sometimes transferred to the family itself, as he was pulled between loyalty to these brothers of his who were sometimes in and out of trouble, and good citizenship and morality and doing what's right. And so that certainly found its way into that story. I don't know if I knew that before I started writing, but once I got into the story, I knew that was a part of it, a big part of it.
that was a central issue in Montana, 1948. Yeah. Your comment about being not confident reminded me of one of my favorite comments from a writer who was being interviewed. Bill Moyers was interviewing Barry Lopez, and Barry Lopez said, I think Bill Moyers asked him about, starting a book and whether that's a frightening prospect. And Barry Lopez said, if I'm not scared to death when I'm starting a book, I know it's not going to be any good. I thought that was pretty brilliant. So how did you discover writing, and when did you know that it was something you wanted to pursue?
Well, not in kind of late. I mean, I did not write in grade school or secondary school, mostly because that's just the way it was. English was taught back then, I mean, it was literature one semester, and the literature was usually things that none of us wanted to read, and the other was grammar, which was often diagramming sentences, and I was never very good at that. But then when I got to college, I remember in a freshman English class, I was assigned to write an essay without really knowing what an essay was. But I did a little thing in that essay, and I don't know what the entire essay was or anything like that. But I included a reference to Terry Malloy, the Marlon Brando character in On the Waterfront. I don't even know if it was relevant or anything like that. But I could feel like a certain kind of power in doing that I was able to bring something in. I think I got a B on that. And then I took an advanced composition class in my sophomore year. This was at a community college in Bismarck. And our teacher, it was in the 60s, our teacher was a young woman just out of college, and she said she was going to let us do our own thing. And without really knowing why, I decided that my own thing was going to be poetry. So I started writing poems. And they weren't any good. I mean, I was trying to write good poems, but
Sure. Yeah.
But it just felt good to do it. It felt good to make those poems, and it didn't take long before I felt as though that's what I want for my life. I would like a life that would have writing at the center of it, and that I could keep doing that. I could keep making these things. There were poems. When I got to University of North Dakota, I took a fiction writing class. So I started writing some short stories, and something about that form felt right. It doesn't anymore, but it did at the time. And I got just enough encouragement to keep going. But most of the encouragement really came from doing it. I mean, yep.
The satisfaction.
There didn't used to be a story there, and now there is, and I made it.
Right.
It doesn't mean it's going to be any good, but you're making something.
Yeah. So I'm curious about your relationship with short stories, because I kind of had the same. I started out with those, and I loved the form, and I found it incredibly hard. And so I hardly ever write those anymore either. Is that kind of what happened with you too? Once you discovered the novel, it was like, this is my thing. No.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a teacher at the University of North Dakota who was a novelist, and he said in class one day, he said, he doesn't write short stories because they're just too difficult. He writes novels. And I thought, wait, don't you just have that backwards? But then later I came to understand what it was that he was talking about. Short stories just, I don't know, partly when you write novels, they kind of eat everything.
Yeah.
And so I think maybe some of those things that might go into a story, the novel says, here, I'll take that. I'll make use of that. You put that in here.
Right.
Yeah. So there's something about writing short stories, and like you, I really admire the form, and I have my favorites, but whatever it takes to write them, I don't have them.
Yeah. Yeah, I think just capturing an entire world and a conflict and creating characters in that short of a space is just so challenging. And yeah, the people
You
that
know,
do it well are just amazing.
yeah, and now that we've just said these things, both of us will start writing short stories tomorrow.
Right. Yeah. So, are you? What's the next book?
Well, I don't know.
Oh, you're
Oh
not
yes, I
working on
am.
one.
I'm,
Okay.
yes, I'm always working on them, but I
I
have,
figured you would be.
yeah, I don't miss a day. But I, I have no certainty that anything is going to come of it. The last two books that I've written, I couldn't interest an editor or publisher in, and
Really?
they're in, yeah.
Oh wow.
Don't make me prove it. Don't make me prove it to you. Um, and
Well,
and and maybe they were wrong. I mean, I've put novels aside before and then come back to them and reworked them and found some way to make something work. I don't know how many novels I've published, 10 or 12 or something, and I probably have one or a sizable chunk of one in the drawer for every one that I've published.
hmm
I wish there was some way to find out earlier on. I mean,
yeah.
sometimes you have to write the whole damn thing to find out this isn't going to work. This doesn't
It's
work.
not fair.
It isn't fair. It isn't fair. There should be a little light that goes on.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm working on something, and yeah, I hope something comes of it.
Um, yeah, there's a lot of us from the same demographic that are struggling with this getting published right now, and I think there's good reasons for it, but also,
Yeah,
yeah, there's a lot of us that are experiencing some frustration with that. Um, you probably have an agent though, right?
I do.
So
I do.
have they were they did they shop the last two or
Yes,
okay.
but not widely.
Okay.
And I didn't have the nerve, I guess, to say, why didn't
Mm.
you just keep
Yeah.
sending that or something? Maybe because I didn't want to hear what they might have to tell me. Uh,
Yeah.
but so maybe I might try on my own with a couple of these. I have since reworked them after getting um, after having them turned down,
hmm
and I agreed with some things, but not entirely. They were both just sort of big houses, and when you submit there, it I don't know. It's I think a committee sort of votes
Yeah,
on your. It's not just
that's
an
right.
editor,
That's right.
but an
Yeah.
editor and some people, and and they might be looking for other things.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know exactly what makes a very successful novel, even though I read them all the time. Um, but they're out there, but they're kind of
Yeah.
different.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's just feels like such a crapshoot all the time. And
Yeah,
there's always go back to was it Robert Town that said nobody knows anything? And he's talking about Hollywood. Like, nobody knows what's going to be successful until they put it out there. And, so yeah,
yeah, and then everybody tries to make the same thing.
right. Yeah. Yeah. With the current situation, there's been a lot of budget cuts and a lot of basically attacks on the arts. What do you think that our role is as writers in this atmosphere? It's a hard question.
It's a good question. It's a really good question. I keep writing, trying to write good books, try not to be discouraged, even knowing that sometimes good books aren't treated kindly. I, I, I don't think that the entire situation is all that unhealthy. It just seems so fragmented right
Mm,
now. I mean, um, we don't have any kind of literary center in this country the way we used to, and maybe we shouldn't have. I mean, we don't have the Tonight Show anymore, in which writers would sometimes appear. We don't have the major review media that would always review a new novel by so and so. But we have a hell of a lot of small presses. We have a lot of different ways that we can talk about and have conversations about books. I think that bookstores now do what colleges and universities used to do, which was to have writers in, to have readings, and to have conversations with readers. I think all of those are really healthy, but we're not going to have the NEA anymore. And no matter what else the NEA did, and one year I was one of the readers for proposals, is that it said, there's an agency of government, a part of our government thinks it's important that people do this, thinks that it's of value, and we're going to support it, even though the support was just,
Right.
I mean, the Defense Department could fund it out of a spare change or something.
Yeah.
And so we're not going to have that, but people still want to read.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. I mean, in a way, it does feel like it's just going to provide a lot more motivation for people to try harder and push harder to get work out there and support good work. So
Yeah,
I see. Yeah, I think that's a valid point, but it is also very frustrating that the current administration just doesn't seem to have any regard for the arts.
no, none whatsoever. No,
Yeah.
and whatever the sensibility is that is required to respond to artistic endeavors, it's totally absent. Totally
Yeah.
absent. But look at what you're doing with this podcast. I mean, this is something that wasn't around a couple decades ago, and it's another important contribution. And I think it's going to work.
Well, yeah, I hope so. Let's hope. Well, thank you so much, Larry. I really enjoyed this, and I appreciate you taking the time.
You're welcome. Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. I want to thank you all for joining me for this episode of The Song of Rowland. Thanks to Stephen Gillis at DeZonk Books for sponsoring this podcast. I want to thank Larry Watson for a fascinating conversation. And I also want to thank my son Fletcher for his musical contributions. And thanks to Tiffany Haug for producing this episode. Thanks again, and I hope to see you next time on The Song of Rowland, a podcast about American culture.